Thank you very much for your attention and participation. Oh, I can do it. I see that Mr. Jakub Kerlenski is with us. So, welcome. Thank you very much for your participation. Mr. Jakub Kerlenski is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and he was kind enough to accept Metamorphosis' invitation to join us at the conference and provide a lightning talk about the situation that deeply impacts the development of democracy both in the region and the country, especially the effect of foreign malign influences or foreign actor influences on the democratic processes in the region. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Kalensky and to welcome him for his talk. And afterwards, we'll have a few minutes between the sessions for discussion with the audience. Please, Mr. Kerlenski, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the introduction. I will briefly talk about foreign disinformation campaigns and what kind of threat they pose. And in the end, I would like to offer some recommendations, what can be done about this problem. I believe it is still important to emphasize that disinformation poses a serious security threat. And the biggest threat in Europe is by far disinformation from Russia. In fact, they are the #1 disinformation actor globally. Last year, a study from Princeton University counted that Russians are responsible for 2/3 of foreign influence efforts on this planet. In other words, the Kremlin spreads twice as many disinformation campaigns than the rest of the world combined. Information as a weapon is a part of Russian military doctrine and other strategic documents. The so-called journalists receive awards from the regime for lying, for example, about the annexation of Crimea or the Russian war crimes in Syria. And we see that these campaigns have effect. We see European politicians or other public figures repeating Russian lies about Ukraine, about MH17, about Syria, and more. Opinion polls are showing us that in various countries and during various campaigns, even up to 20 or 30% of people can believe various disinformation messages. And if you take into account some close elections like the US elections in 2016 or the Brexit referendum in the same year, even influencing just 1% or 2% of voters can already decide the outcome of the elections. And these disinformation campaigns influence not only the public opinion, but they can affect our health and even our lives. In the last few years, Russia, often supported by China, spread thousands of disinformation messages related to COVID-19 or disinformation about vaccination. The pro-Russian websites all over Europe are persuading people that vaccines are dangerous, that COVID doesn't even exist, that masks are in fact threatening your health and not protecting you, etc. They weaken our response to this pandemic. They threaten the health and even lives of European citizens. The disinformation campaigns are frequently targeting the most divisive topic in a given country. In some country, it might be racial questions. In another, it would be the LGBT question. In yet another, it can be the migration crisis or the ethnic tensions. But COVID has provided disinformers with an opportunity to find a divisive topic that works everywhere. In countries that are more liberal and more conservative, in countries that are ethnically homogeneous or ethnically diverse. Spreading fear of vaccines and undermining the trust into authorities and institutions, that works unfortunately everywhere. And the Kremlin has here a cynical zero-sum game principle. The worse for them, the better for us. So what can be done about it? I like to talk about 4 lines of defense, 4 groups of various countermeasures against disinformation. And I believe that if we are to succeed in this fight against disinformation, we need to be working on all 4 lines of defense. We cannot neglect one or the other. The first line is the easiest, but it is very often neglected. We need to be documenting the threat. We need to be monitoring the disinformation ecosystem, following what messages they spread, through what channels, what groups of people they target, how many people they persuade. Often you will hear that it is difficult to measure the impact of disinformation, and I agree with that. But even simple opinion polling, measuring how many people believe in this or that disinformation, following whether the number increases or decreases, that would already provide us with some valuable information. In various countries, this task of documenting is performed by various teams. The EU, for example, has the EU versus Disinfo campaign for documenting and exposing the Russian disinformation campaigns. In other countries, it might be journalists or the civil society doing this task. But despite a lot of quality products there, we still do not have the answer to some basic questions like how many disinformation channels are there, how many messages they spread, how many people they persuade. Try to imagine that we will be fighting COVID without knowing how many people per day get infected, how many people need to be hospitalized, how many people get killed by the virus. We are in such a situation with disinformation right now. The second line is raising awareness about the threat. So whereas in the first line, we were trying to get more information about the threat, in the second line, we are trying to spread the information among more people. Again, this is sometimes done by various Stratcom teams in various ministries or government agencies, but it is also often done by the civil society, especially if the government is not doing it, then the civil society has to step in. In this line of defense, we need as many actors as possible, simply for the reason that no actor can persuade all the people on his own. You are kindly listening to me, and I'm glad for that, but I probably wouldn't succeed with pensioners on the Moravian countryside. They wouldn't trust me. I worked in Brussels, now I work for the Americans. That's suspicious. But we need to be finding such actors who will be trusted by various target groups. The third line of defense is repairing the weaknesses in the information space in order to reduce the target that the disinformers can be hitting. This can be done by various tactical measures, media literacy programs, pressure on social media companies, since they are one of the biggest vectors of disinformation, educating high-level government officials, journalists, and other key actors in the information space. And also, given the fact that disinformation campaigns frequently target divisive lines in the society, it is useful to be working on reducing the tensions between various socio-economic groups, between the majority population and its racial, ethnic, or sexual minorities, the tensions between the capital and the countryside, between the better educated and less educated, you name it. This should be a sensible policy in any country, but it will help to reduce the target for disinformation too. And finally, the fourth line of defense, we need to be limiting and punishing the disinformation actors. We are still not doing enough here. The only journalist on the EU sanctions list is Dmitry Kiselyov from Russian state TV for his role in the propaganda campaign before the annexation of Crimea. And it's good that he's there, but why is he the only one? On the same TV channel where Kiselyov is spreading hatred against Ukrainians and against the West in general, we have Vladimir Solovyov speaking just minutes before Dmitry Kiselyov, with the only difference that when Solovyov finishes his show, he sits on a plane, flies to Italy, and enjoys his villa at Lago di Como. The person who is spreading hatred against the West and fear of Europeans, fear of Westerners, this person is allowed to enjoy all the benefits that the West has to offer. I just don't think that this is right. Similarly, we should be sanctioning the organizations spreading disinformation, starting with the biggest Russian state TV channels. They are the basis for the whole disinformation campaign. What you see on a Sunday in this Kiselyov's or Solovyov's shows, you will see later in the pro-Kremlin websites all over Europe. And guess where the Russian state TV channels get their money? It's from Western companies. If you have a look at the biggest advertisers on Russian state TV, it's all Western companies like Mars, Oriflame, Nestle, you name it. Sanctioning these channels would mean they would lose billions of rubles in advertisement revenue. Without Western money, they would hardly manage to finance the propaganda channels for Russians. So they probably wouldn't even have enough resources for exporting their propaganda abroad. But in order to justly punish the perpetrators, we need to be investigating the disinformation campaigns. And here, Europe is lacking behind the United States. The Russian interference into both the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections in the US has been investigated by various legal bodies and resulted in many criminal consequences and sanctions. But in Europe, I'm not aware of anything resembling the Mueller investigation in the United States. And unfortunately, that means that we in Europe, we are sending the message that we don't really mind that someone is influencing our population and interfering into our elections. I think that's a very, very bad message. So that would be it about the 4 lines of defense. And I think I've been going on for 10 minutes already. So perhaps now is the time for the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much for this inspiring introduction. Because as I was comparing the situation overall, we can find instances of the interference that you mentioned, both in the Balkans, Western Balkans region, and in North Macedonia, especially because all the people who are dealing with these issues, organizations and institutions, have been pointing out to various aspects of these types of needs. You mentioned 4 needs. First, we need more research or information about the level of threat and the spread of the disinformation, the effect. Then we need to raise awareness to make in order to make a consensus in society of what to do about it, which would be proper democratic method. Then to reduce the polarization, which is exploited. The fissures in different societies are exploited by these disinformation networks, and also that those who perpetrate these manipulations, and which are often related in European context with criminal behavior, such as spread of hate speech and threats and other crimes as defined by European Council of Europe members, they need to be marked and their position made known widely, and also to be under sanctions for their behavior based on the existing laws and regulations. I would invite the audience to offer some comments. If we have people in the room, they can do it by using the microphone, or if the people who are on the Zoom raise their hand, then our team of administrators will allow them to join in by voice or by comments via chat. Please, audience. At the moment, we don't have this type of question, but just a second. Okay.
Can I ask?
With us is Mr. Vladimir Petresky, who is the editor of fact-checking service TruthMeter, founded by Metamorphosis Foundation. Vladimir, please, you had some comment or question?
Yes, I have a comment and question. It's a very interesting idea to plead and to ask, or you will explain if you also meant to legislate to foreign companies in Russia and maybe even in China when they are putting advertisements on state media that perpetrate disinformation and lies. As we very well know, in China, it is even more. I mean, the state-owned media spreading disinformation is even more widespread, and it's not only state-owned media. Over there, even telecom operators send SMS messages to mobile phone users, anti-Western messages denigrating the West, the United States, and the democracy, and so on. But I just wanted to ask you if you could expand a little bit about that. I mean, is that idea even viable? Because I mean, if the Western companies which are working in the Russian market, if they cannot advertise, I mean, then they will be in worse position than their Russian competitors. I mean, so they might not be successful, or they might even have to withdraw from the Russian markets. How would that work? So, do you think that this option is realistic? And also, I would, if you could, also expand on the situation in China, that would also be great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vladimir. As for whether it's realistic or not, I'm not sure I have the answer. I know that if we don't try, it will certainly not happen. The European Democracy Action Plan, one of the documents that deals with disinformation and countering thereof from the level of the European Union, actually mentions that the EU should start looking for measures that will make the perpetrators pay for conducting disinformation campaigns. As far as I know, they still don't have like a toolbox. They still don't have specific measures that should be undertaken. But already the idea is there, which is a progress, because I remember the debates in 2015, and back then it was even controversial to point out that Russia is leading a disinformation campaign. So I think there has been some development. On the other hand, I fully appreciate that this might be problematic, and that there will be a strong pushback from the companies that have commercial interests. On the other hand, like I still believe that the status quo that we have right now, where Western companies are basically paying for anti-Western propaganda, it simply doesn't make sense to me. I think it is worth pointing out that this situation doesn't feel right. About China, full disclosure, I don't speak Chinese, so my knowledge of Chinese disinformation campaigns is more secondhand. But I do believe that they are definitely on the rise. Especially during the pandemic, we've seen that Russian and Chinese messaging very often kind of seems like they have a similar lines to take. Sometimes you would see disinformation popping up on Russian media and then getting amplified by Chinese state media. For example, the message that it was actually the US Army that dragged the virus into China in the first place. And there have been several instances of Russian and Chinese state media having mutual trainings, programs, which sounds quite worrying to me. I think that if we have the Russian know-how being joined by the Chinese resources and the Chinese knowledge of automated intelligence, I think we will be facing a significantly bigger problem in the next few years.
So it seems to me that actions like this, like withdrawing advertising or withdrawing completely, like ceasing economic activity in countries whose regimes perpetrate disinformation, works best when something really bad or really atrocious happens. Like in Xinjiang, we know about those concentration camps that they have there and that they call re-education camps. A lot of Western brands simply stopped importing Xinjiang cotton. Then in the south of China, there are a lot of instances where the Chinese companies use slave labor from North Korea. And then once again, Western brands stopped using those companies as a supplier. But the issue is that acts like those, those extreme inhumane acts, that cannot be a viable, consistent policy. I just wanted to ask one more short question, something that I rarely hear being talked about. What do you think about offensive activities, like doing to audiences in this country, spreading disinformation over there the same way that they're doing in the West? I know that this is incredibly controversial and that we shouldn't probably be doing it at all, but we are not even talking about it, not even to say, no, we are not going to do that. Do you have an opinion on this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm in the camp that feels like this probably isn't right. I think it would be against our values, and I think it would damage us as kind of the democratic camp much more than we could gain from this operation. I also think that it's useful to keep in mind that apart from this export part of disinformation campaigns, there is quite a big defensive part, protecting the Russian information space against messaging that might come from the West. This shutting down of independent media outlets, proclaiming them foreign agents, or take the big Chinese firewall. I think that we would even have quite a lot of problem even reaching out to those populations. But still, I think on like the level of the values, I think we do not want to be spreading disinformation and simply doing the same as these undemocratic regimes are doing.
Thank you very much. We also agree that unless we adhere to the highest standards, both of democracy and journalistic standards, there is really no way to counter. There is no way to fight fire with fire in this space, because we are talking about democracy, which is value-based system, it is. We have realized that using Machiavellism, including populism, even for a good purpose, at the end backfires. So unless we are strict with our principles, then it is really something that just postpones the solution, if we can use an euphemism rather than. But as a conclusion, what would you as an expert, and possibly what is the main takeaway by the work of the Atlantic Council and all the activities that you've done so far, that you would stress as the most important thing for in order to all the stakeholders to understand of how we should work this, how we should counter the disinformation together? Usually, you mentioned reducing polarization. There are polarized opinions even about how to fight disinformation. So what would be your conclusion of your lightning talk about how to go on, and what would you recommend to us?
Thank you. Great question. I think probably the most important principle is that there is no silver bullet solution. You know, if someone tells you that, I don't know, media literacy solves everything, no, that's simply not true. There is no silver bullet solution. We simply need to be applying many measures that go in the same direction. But we really need to be doing quite a lot from many different actors from the state level, from the civil society sector, but also from celebrities, for example. They could help in countering disinformation law. So we need to be doing many, many, many little things, each of them solving like 1 or 2% of the problem. And we should stop hoping that there is something that will solve, 60 or 70% of the problem.
Thank you. So the conclusion would be that we are not waiting for a hero, but that all of us working together as individual citizens are the collective savior of our democracy, and which is a precondition also for science and for improvement of our lives and of our children and posterity.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Mr. Kerlenski, for your inspiring talk. And
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo. And we would continue at 2:30 with the next session, on which will follow up Mr. Kalensky's talk on disinformation.